So my goal here in this video is to talk to you a little bit about your options for the final paper and then direct your attention to 3 samples. And then we'll do some other activities looking more into the details about how to write. So your final paper is called a lit review / proposal. You're synthesizing research in order to propose a study or analysis. And so there'll be 3 main parts to your paper. The literature review, where you synthesize, a really defined research question. This will just be tiny, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 bulleted points, and then a section of proposed methods. So if we think about these in terms of the novelty moves, and if you aren't familiar with it, find the GCC handout on the novelty moves. We can think of the literature review as synthesizing research in order to look at the status quo, and there will be multiple status quos, and identifying gaps in that status quo. By the time we get to the research question, we should use that research question to really clearly pinpoint the exact gap that you are going to be addressing. And then your proposed methods will fill that gap with lots of details. Now, in this class, we have not discussed research methods a lot. I'm going to this will not be a major part of the proposal, but I want you to kind of think through it and think through the whole idea. How would you actually execute this out to the end? I'm going to just be looking for something in terms of proposed methods, something that seems reasonable. But I'm not going to worry too much about the details of these. All right. So when you're thinking about gaps, the way to go ahead and approach this would be to think, what do I want to know? What would be my research question? Where do I want to end up? And then you'll go and you'll synthesize some research, look at some research, and think about, okay, do I want to change my research question because other people have already studied this? Can I make it more narrow? But start with the research question before you go into starting to write or starting to look up sources. So there's 3 main questions or gaps that you might propose. First, just based on our readings, is there something unknown? For instance, we have talked about philosophy has come up in some of our readings. We looked at some corpus analysis. Kind of said, if you look at Mary Swords, we went over in class a couple weeks ago, philosophy was kind of weird. It was different. So maybe you're like, I want to know more about philosophy, or there's another discipline or another type of writing, another genre, something that you want to know more about. That's a really good starting research question. You might also be thinking, is there some kind of pedagogical application of these materials, of these readings that I would like to test? The oral report that Julia has is one such pedagogical application of some of the research. I'll show you another example based on my own research. But if you've been kind of thinking like, oh, now that I've done all this reading, I really have some ideas for techniques I'd like to try out in the classroom. You can propose some kind of way of teaching and then test to see whether or not it works. Last area, and these kind of bleed over. These are not mutually exclusive. Don't worry too much about whether you're in one area or another. These are meant to be generative, not limiting. You might have some kind of hypothesis to test. So for instance, we've asked in class some things like, well, are diffuse disciplines more likely to exhibit X features? That's a hypothesis there, where you could easily say, okay, let's test that. Let's see if that's accurate. So if you look through your notes and you notice that you've written down some hypotheses, that might be a good research question to test. All right, And in terms of methods, there's three main methods that you would probably use. And so as you start to do some research for this project, you might want to be looking a little more carefully at those texts for the methods that they use. And you might want to be thinking about the readings we've done in class in terms of the methods that they've used. So the most common method that we've seen is just analyzing text. This could go under the idea of the name of discourse analysis or corpus analysis, but basically you get a group of texts and you analyze them for features. We've also seen a lot of readings where we ask questions of experts or novices, maybe do interviews or focus groups. I'm also putting in here think aloud protocols. This kind of way of asking questions, finding out more about processes, how people approach a rhetorical problem, or you could ask experts what they think about writing. You could use it to test some hypotheses that you have about writing in a particular field. And then there's designing an experiment, and we'll look at an example of that. Now I want to look at three sample proposals, and all of them are a little bit unique, a little bit different, but I'll just kind of talk through these potential models. The first one's from my own research that I have done with Laura Wilder. We read a study of hers earlier this semester on literary analysis in the classroom. And Laura and I, this is for an actual research grant that we applied for and did get, that we studied. And this is a teaching application. So our idea was to take those topoi of literary analysis and explicitly teach them to students and see if that helps students improve their writing. So in here, we start off with, and you'll notice our first paragraph, the number of citations. Typical way a literature review goes is from broad to narrow. We'll talk some more about this. And at the broad ends, I'm citing multiple studies. I'm talking very generally about the field and about problems in the field. And then as I get closer and closer to my research question, I get more and more specific. I spend more time on individual studies. So here we're looking at students face lots of problems when they're writing across the disciplines, but there's controversy on whether explicitly teaching the conventions of the field can help students. And then we follow up. In this case, one thing that's a little unusual about this proposal is that we're citing our own previous work. But we focus a lot on these topoi that were found in Feinstock and Secor, and as we're getting more narrow here, we spend a lot of time explaining these and talking about our previous research, which is where we're intervening. So we're making a case for why we think these topoi would be effective if we explicitly taught them. And I did a trial of this, and anecdotally have some evidence that yeah, it worked. And then we end up here is okay. This does not have specific. No, we do have specific research questions. Here they start with, we don't have a research question section, but here are our questions. In particular, we seek to examine who benefits this instruction, and we're looking for a careful analysis of the merits and drawbacks, and then we have some more specific questions about this instruction. Here are our methods. We propose 3 experimental, 3 control sections. of a particular course. The experimental sections were explicitly taught the topoi. Control sections just did what they normally did. We describe the number of people we think will be involved, how we would implement explicitly teaching the topoi, uh, and different kinds of questionnaires. But our main method for analyzing whether it worked was collecting the course papers and getting other people to write them and see if the students who were explicitly taught the topoi did better. Okay, so this is a relatively short proposal for an experimental study to test a pedagogical application. Let's go ahead and look at an example that does a discourse analysis. This example is on identifying a trend in scholarly writing that is more activist writing, that is less traditionally trying to find a research question and more trying to fix things in the world and actually take action. And so this student wanted to know, what does this kind of writing look like? He wants to know more about it. How do people make these arguments? He was envisioning himself as possibly doing this kind of scholarship, so he wanted to learn more about it. I gave you a copy with my comments on it because I had it here. So he begins by, now this one's a little unusual. He did this for a full semester version of Writing in the Disciplines a number of years ago. And he actually he did a pilot study to test the feasibility of his methods. I'm not expecting you all to do that for this class. So he's talking about Thais and Zawacki. This is what got him really interested in it, because they talk about some alternative discourses. So he was really interested in this activist discourse here. So you can see he's citing several scholars up here and sort of talking about different areas related to his topic. Here he brings in some of the sources that he did in his pilot study. And this is a move that you all could make, especially if you're proposing a textual analysis. You could say, here's an example of a type of writing that is like really different from anything we discussed in class. I want to know more about this. So you can just pull an example from the wild, which is what he's doing here. And you'll notice here when he gets really close, as he's getting closer to the end, he's spending a lot of time on Thais and Zawacki in particular, because here he is kind of grounding his research question in their research. How is activist scholarship similar or different to these criteria that Thais and Zawacki define? And then in his pilot study, let's find his research question. Okay, ideally the research question would be right in here as this draft currently stands, and this is a student draft. His research question is implied. It does appear these are the questions, though, that he is using to drive his pilot study. It's in a little bit of a weird place here. But he has some specific questions that he is looking for in his pilot study. And then he talks about his results here. So he doesn't go into a lot of detail about his methods because he's just looking at five texts. But this is another example of a student who took the option of the unknown. Last example I'm going to show you is someone, it's kind of a little bit unknown and a little bit hypothesis testing. This is a little bit different from the topics that we've discussed in Writing in the Disciplines, but it's definitely related to the GCC practicum, where we talk about visual design and PowerPoints. And one of the questions that she had was, we have the assertion evidence model, which suggests visual evidence, but that doesn't necessarily work really well in humanities PowerPoint presentations. So people often use these conceptual images, like if you're talking about hierarchy, put a picture of a pyramid to suggest the idea of hierarchy. And so she's just wondering, is that a good idea? Is this a good way to do this? So she introduces the research on slide design, and hers is a little different than the others, and you can do yours this way. It's an option, you don't have to. So she has an abstract. Her introduction kind of sets the stage for the significance, and then she has a separate section for the literature review, where she's describing some of the controversies and status quo in research on slide design. And so here's an example of what she means by a conceptual image. She made this up uh, just based on her own hypothesizing, her own curiosity. How could this work in this context? And here we see our research questions. This leads communication tutors to wonder what images are relevant in humanities PowerPoint presentations, and if these images are relevant, because her concern is that an image like this could just be, it's more decoration, really. It's not like a scientific diagram or a graph where where it's really central. It's more just kind of complementing or decorating, perhaps, the PowerPoint. Here's her research questions, and then here she goes into methodology. She spends a lot of time on this methodology. She and I worked on it a bunch. She actually ended up proposing this for her honors thesis. So she's very motivated to do a lot of work on this. So these are three different examples